What's up, boys?
What's up, gang?
What's up, Obama?
Boys, I thought it would be fun if we did a tier list of all of the Season 1 SpongeBob episodes.
Are you kidding me? That will take forever. There were like 40 episodes in just that season alone.
Yeah, man, my bedtime is in 30 minutes. I'm not sure I have time for this.
Look, guys, it'll be quick and fun. Let's just do it.
Fine, whatever.
Fine.
All right, fellas, let's start with Help Wanted. What do we think?
This episode is the definition of B tier. While it is an all-time classic and is the first episode of SpongeBob ever, the plot is not suspenseful, the anchovies are annoying, and the animation is amateurish. Squidward being so pale in this episode makes me really uncomfortable. Crazy to think that Bill Clinton was still the president when this episode aired for the first time.
I agree with Donald for the most part, but I think this should at least be A tier. This was the episode that established SpongeBob as a fry cook at the Krusty Krab and also established Squidward's hatred towards SpongeBob. So many classic moments in just this one episode. While it is not as good as the other episodes in this season, I think it would be asinine to not at least put it in A tier.
I think A tier is appropriate, Donald. You are crazy if you do not like the animation. The old school crude art style is merely a time capsule of the available technology when this episode was released in 1999. I am putting it in A tier.
Okay, I can live with that, I guess. By the way, do you think Sleepy Joe will be able to stay awake for the other 40 episodes we have to get through?
Fuck off, Donald.
Okay, let's move to our next episode, R. I think this is a definitive S tier episode. I loved watching reruns of this episode with my daughters, and it is one of my personal favorites.
I am with you, Barack. This episode is fucking great.
Are you both fucking crazy? While I agree this episode is very good, to put in S tier would be foolish. The constant allusions and references to pirate diction and Mr. Krabs being an annoying, greedy bastard really ruins this one for me. I can live with A tier, but putting it in S tier would be a sin.
It is so ironic that you would be annoyed by someone being an annoying, greedy bastard, you racist billionaire fuck.
Shut up, Joe. You are just jealous that I have a hot wife and loads of money and you don't.
Yeah, your wife might be the only person in the country that is greedier than you. We all know she's only in it for the money.
Damn, Donald, he got you on that one. Let's put this episode in A tier as well and move along. Okay, boys, let's discuss boating school. Overall, this episode isn't bad, but it loses points for me because it establishes one of the most annoying tropes of the show, with SpongeBob failing his boating test, despite trying for over 23 years. B tier for me.
Are you taking drugs, Barack? This episode is fantastic. This is one of the most mature episodes of SpongeBob, and it has a great theme that showcases the consequences of cheating, especially with something as important as driving. This episode is entertaining, full of jokes, and great for the children of the United States to consume.
For once, I agree with Sleepy Joe. This is an all-time classic episode with mature themes. It is enjoyable for audience members of all ages, and I appreciate that. I say S tier, but we'll settle on A tier for you, Barack. By the way, Joe does this episode really have a great moral, since at the end, Mrs. Puff encourages SpongeBob to cheat so he can finish the exam?
Shit, I forgot about that part. Still a great episode, though. A tier for sure.
Not surprised you forgot that detail, Sleepy Joe.
Fuck you, Donald. Why do you always make fun of me?
Please stop fighting. It sounds like we all agree on A tier, so let's move on. Okay, up next is Fools in April. I am not a big fan of this episode. It is mid at best, very forgettable compared to other vastly superior episodes. The episode is very annoying, and I dreaded when it came on as I watched the show with my daughters. C tier at best.
Barack, you are way too harsh of a critic. While I agree this is not the best episode of SpongeBob that has ever aired, I do think that the episode is very good. B tier for sure. I really like the joke SpongeBob pulls on the green fish where he only puts one ice cube in his drink.
Sorry, Donald, but I'm going to have to agree with Barack on this one. The episode is mid at best. There are some pretty funny moments, but many of the jokes plus the overall theme of the episode feel forced. C tier.
C tier it is. Let's continue. All right, next is Hooky. Pretty good episode, but nothing special. I'm feeling B tier.
Yeah, B tier is fine with me. Pretty good episode, not too funny, but not terrible.
Yeah, I am with you. This episode is okay.
Okay, let's rank I Was a Teenage Gary. What do we think, fellas?
Much like the last episode, this is mid at best. The episode is forgettable, and the ending is absurd, even for a children's cartoon. I feel this episode had a fantastic start, and we were going to learn a great lesson from Squidward not taking care of Gary, but instead it devolved into stupidity. This genuinely felt like watching a children's cartoon rather than a nostalgia trip. D tier.
Donald, I think you are too critical. The episode is pretty good. I like the ending where Squidward is turned into a snail.
Sleepy Joe, you are wrong this time. This episode is absolute garbage, D tier.
Screw you, man.
All right, guys, let's discuss Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. I personally do not care much for Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy as characters. So the fact that this episode introduces them really makes it hard for me to enjoy it. The episode gets better toward the end, but the conclusion was not strong enough to save it.
Barack, you are insane. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are all-time great SpongeBob characters. While this is definitely not the best episode featuring the two, the episode is pretty good. I am thinking B tier.
Sorry, Sleepy Joe, but Barack is correct for once. This episode is trash. Mermaid Man saying evil got old really fast. The only reason you like Mermaid Man is because it is heavily implied he has dementia just like you.
Screw you, Donald. I just think he is a cool superhero.
Yeah, a superhero that you can relate to.
Barack, if I was so stupid, why did you select me as your vice president?
Because Barack is almost as stupid as you are, Sleepy Joe.
Cut it out. You are both acting like children. We are putting this garbage episode in D tier, and that is final. While we are on the topic, let's discuss Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2. Like I said before, I am not a big fan of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes, but this one is slightly better. Not good enough to escape D tier, though.
Obama, I agree. The Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes are usually pretty weak, and this one is no exception. D tier at best, but better than the first Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode.
You guys are insane. These are good episodes.
Sleepy Joe, you are literally the only person in the world that thinks that.
Retweet. Donald is correct. Those episodes are trash, just like your opinion, Joe. D tier, moving on. Up next is Muscle Bob Buff Pants. This is an all-time great episode which establishes the classic recurring motif of SpongeBob's battle with traditional masculinity. I really like the episode's theme of not pretending to be something you're not. Really nice episode, but not S tier, but definitely A tier. What do you guys think?
This is a great episode, S tier, in my opinion. Love that it is funny and also has a good overarching lesson.
Are you guys fucking joking right now? This is a pretty good episode, but B tier is the highest I am willing to go. This episode has so many plot holes that I can't take it seriously. Pretty funny episode, but from a writing and plot development perspective, it is lackluster.
Sorry, Donald, but majority wins. This episode is going in A tier. Next is Nature Pants. I think this episode is okay at best, probably C tier, but I am flexible if you guys disagree.
Yeah, this episode is okay, but nothing special. Not a lot of memorable moments and not the funniest early SpongeBob episode. Very forgettable, but not terrible. I am okay with ranking it at C tier.
Those may have been the two worst takes I have ever heard. Nature Pants is a classic episode and one of the most emotional episodes of SpongeBob in the entire series. The episode teaches a great lesson about valuing the things we have as residents of a privileged first world country. I think it should at least be B tier.
Donald, if I put it in the higher part of C tier, will you be happy?
Not as happy as your wife would be if she married a real man, but I am fine with that.
Keep my wife's name out of your mouth, you one-term winning bozo.
Barack, don't start with me. You only hate me because I destroyed any positive legacy you would have left behind because my 4 years in office were so spectacular. No one will remember you except for being the president who came before the great Donald J. Trump.
Fuck off, Donald. I will be remembered for the rest of human history because I was the first black president.
Yeah, well, that's the only reason.
That was a cheap shot, Donald.
Does the truth hurt?
Donald, you are wasting our time. Now let's discuss Neptune's spatula. Personally, I really like this episode. It was satisfying to watch SpongeBob put a literal god in his place. S tier for me, but what do you guys think?
Really nice episode. I like the David versus Goliath feel to it. Classic SpongeBob, but in my opinion, not good enough for S tier. I do not think this episode is funny enough to push it to the top.
Yeah, this is a solid episode, but not S tier. I agree with Donald that A tier is the right place.
Okay, but it is going higher on A tier than other episodes because I really like it. All right, guys, let's move on to Opposite Day. Pretty good episode, but nothing special. I'm thinking B tier.
Obama, you are insane. This is A tier, at least. This episode has so many good moments, especially from Gary the Snail. It should be an A tier solely for how funny it is.
Sleepy Joe, of course, your dementia-ridden brain enjoys an episode as stupid as this one. The whole premise of this episode is absurd. Very forgettable episode when compared to others. C tier at best.
Donald, the only day you were a good president was on Opposite Day.
Joe, not a day has gone by where you were a good president or even a good vice president.
Let's agree on B tier and move on. All right, up next is Pickles. I think there is no question that this is an S tier episode.
I am with you, Barack. There is no question this is S tier, just like there is no question I won the 2020 presidential election, no matter how much Donald bitches about it.
Fuck you, Joe. You know I won that election.
You mean like how you won the popular vote in 2016?
Who gives a shit about the popular vote? I won the states that mattered and defeated crooked Hillary.
Whatever, Donald, maybe you can stroke your ego some other time. What do you think of Pickles?
Pickles is S tier for sure. Glad we all agree on this, and I do not have to educate any of you on why this is one of, if not the best episodes of SpongeBob ever created.
Cool, we all agree. Let's move on to another classic episode, Pizza Delivery. Once again, I think S tier. Not only is this episode really funny, but it has been immortalized for all of the memes that came out of it. This was one of my favorite episodes to watch with my daughters as they were growing up.
Yeah, I am with you, Barack. This is an S tier for sure. I also liked watching this with my kids. Sleepy Joe, do you like watching this episode with Hunter when he isn't abusing hardcore drugs?
Fuck you, Donald, that hit close to home.
Yeah, Donald, that wasn't cool.
Anyway, I agree Pizza Delivery is an S-tier episode. I love the part where Squidward stands up for SpongeBob. Classic moment.
Okay, let's talk about rock bottom. Personally, as a half-black man, I do not like that this episode implies that SpongeBob goes to a lower income portion of town and that the people there are weird and should not be trusted. It feels classist at best, and I would put it in C tier, but what do you guys think?
Barack, you are clearly reading way too heavily into the underlying symbolism of the show, and you are out of your fucking mind if you think this episode has anything to do with class and income disparity. That being said, this episode is mid at best and should be in B tier.
Yeah, I am with Donald on this one. Pretty funny episode, especially the scene where SpongeBob cannot get on the bus. But compared to other episodes, it is pretty forgettable. B tier.
Okay, I will put it in B tier. Let's move on. What do we think about SB 129?
Pretty good episode, very thought-provoking. S tier, without a doubt, might be the best episode from season 1.
Joe, I am surprised you would ever enjoy something that is thought-provoking. However, I agree with you that this is a fantastic episode. Plenty of humor, great plot, and maybe most important of all, it is past that point in season 1 where the animation was still weird, so the episode looks great. S tier.
For once both of you guys agree and are correct about something, this episode is possibly one of the best SpongeBob has to offer. S tier for sure. Moving on. Okay, next is fun. At first I really liked this episode, but over time I grew to resent it. The episode is not horrible, but the song is incredibly annoying and the humor is lacking. Pretty entertaining episode though, and I enjoyed seeing Plankton's more tender side. B tier is where I would place this episode.
This episode is absolutely terrible. The song in this episode is fucking terrible. I would rather pour sulfuric acid down my ears than listen to that horse shit. This episode is D tier in my opinion, though I see why others, especially children, might enjoy it.
You guys are idiots. This is an all-time classic episode. The song is great, and I love when it gets stuck in my head. The ending is hilarious, and it teaches a valuable lesson about not trusting unsavory characters such as Plankton. I would put it in S tier for my own list, but I am willing to budge and put it in A tier.
I will literally incite another riot at the Capitol if you put this in A tier, Barack.
B tier it is then. Up next is Bubble Stand. I think this was the first ever Squidward torture porn episode, which started a really unfortunate trend for the SpongeBob franchise. Overall, the episode feels mindless, and I am not much of a fan of the childish nature of it. I realize this is a children's television show, but I have a higher standard of quality measurement when it comes to SpongeBob. I would stick this episode in B tier.
This is not the worst episode ever made, but I agree with you, Barack. The episode feels pointless, almost like a contemporary children's YouTube video. Its only purpose is to distract a child for 11 minutes. C tier at best.
It's an okay episode, but nothing special. I think you guys are right. Let's stick it in C tier.
Okay, next is Rip Pants. I really like this episode. I think it is really funny, has a good moral, and I really like the song they used at the end of the episode. S tier for sure.
Barack, did Michelle drug your coffee this morning? This episode is mediocre at best. The overall joke of ripping his pants is not funny and feels forced. The song at the end is hot garbage, plus SpongeBob simping for Sandy throughout the episode is something I do not approve of. B tier at best.
The episode is pretty good, but not good enough to be S tier. The overall theme is nice and the jokes are pretty funny, but that annoying song just isn't going to cut it. Sorry, Barack, but this episode just isn't S tier material.
Okay, fine, I will put it in A tier, but I'm not happy about it.
You mean like how those innocent Pakistani civilians were not happy about you drone striking them?
Fuck you, Donald. Why would you even bring that up? I did what I had to do. Okay, next episode is Hall Monitor. I think this is a decent episode, but nothing special. B tier for me.
This episode is so annoying, I cannot stand it. I would make my kids watch something else if they were ever watching this garbage. D tier for me, but still better than the other trash we already put down there.
Wow, Donald, are you serious right now? Barack is right. The episode is nothing special, but D tier is way too harsh. I think B tier. The episode does have some funny moments, but I don't much care for the episodes where SpongeBob makes Mrs. Puff's life a living hell. B tier for me as well.
As you both know, I'm a businessman and I love negotiating. I will settle for a C tier, and that's my final offer.
Okay, I can live with that.
That's fine with me.
Okay, fellas, what do we think about Sandy's rocket?
Really great and underrated episode. Not only is SpongeBob not simping for Sandy, but he is actively going against her desires. I think this episode is A-tier material. The plot is a little wonky, but it is forgivable for all of the great jokes and memes this episode has to offer.
Donald, your opinions get worse and worse the further we get into this tier list. This episode is C tier at best. The plot is the stupidest fucking thing I have ever seen, especially at the end when Patrick shoots himself by mistake. This episode also had one of the worst endings I have ever seen. I realize this is a cartoon, but I cannot get past this episode's weak plot line and ending. The only reason it does not belong in C tier is because of how hard SpongeBob and Patrick roast Squidward when they think he is an alien.
Old Man Joe, how could you hate this episode but love episodes that are objectively garbage, like the Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes?
Donald, the only reason you like this episode is because you started the Space Force, which is the only branch of the military that is more useless than the Coast Guard.
Sleepy Joe, I do not expect you to understand the importance of the Space Force. It is a vital part of our great country's powerful military.
Donald, we all know the Space Force was a waste of the already excessive military budget. I'm putting this episode in B tier, and we are moving on. Up next is Plankton. This might be one of the most obvious S tier episodes yet, and if either of you disagree, prepare to catch these hands. This introduces Plankton, who is one of the best characters in the show, has a ton of funny moments, a satisfying conclusion, crisp animation, and a positive theme.
I am with you, Barack. This is a great episode. I love the part at the end where Plankton gets so horny for a Krabby Patty that it causes him to fail in stealing the secret formula.
The episode is pretty good, but I'm not sure it belongs in S tier with the others we have. I'm not sure it is as good. High A tier for me. I just don't think this episode has the jokes to push it to S tier.
Donald, you're a joke. This is an S tier episode, and that's final. Ah, yes, Naughty Nautical Neighbors, one of the first ever Squidward torture porn. Honestly, this episode is not bad, despite the terrible trope that it started for the franchise. I am trying to judge the quality of this episode objectively, but even while doing that, the best rating I can muster is A tier. What do you guys think?
This episode is very nice. I agree with an A-tier rating. I like how Squidward, in an effort to sabotage SpongeBob and Patrick's friendship, ends up only strengthening it and destroys his house in the process. Serves him right for being a selfish jerk.
You both are way too generous. Barack, the only logical thing you said was that this episode was one of the first of a very annoying trend of Squidward torture porn. I agree with you that this is not the worst of these types of episodes, but that does not forgive this episode for committing the ultimate sin. C tier for starting a terrible trend.
Joe, you have to look at this objectively. You cannot give the episode a lesser score because it was the first in a series of similar episodes that coincidentally happened to be terrible. There are a lot of things in life that started out great and ended up turning sour over time, and this is just another example of that.
Yeah, Sleepy Joe, you have to be level-headed when assessing each episode and look at them independently on a case-by-case basis.
You guys are right. I still think this episode belongs in B tier, though.
Me and Donald agree, so it is going in A tier. Moving on. Next is Jellyfish Jam. I think this is an above-average episode, pretty memorable for the cool visuals and simple plotline, but when you dig deeper, the episode really does not have much to offer. I think this is an easy B tier. What about you guys?
This is a pretty good episode and teaches a valuable lesson on why you should not bring wild animals into your home. Kind of like when we as a country let you and your wife into the White House, Barack.
Donald, keep my wife's name out of your goddamn mouth.
Donald, aren't you one of only 3 presidents to not have a pet in the White House?
Yes, so what?
Doesn't that make you a sociopath?
Yes, according to the fake news, but I really do not think that me choosing not to have a pet is an indicator of my personality or emotional well-being. I just have never been an animal person is all. I like dogs and cats, but do not want to take care of one.
Fair enough. Anyway, I do not like this episode. The visuals always give me a headache, and like you said, Barack the episode is very superficial in humor and plot development. C tier for me.
Of course, the complex visuals offered by this episode gave your tiny, smooth brain issues. Sleepy Joe.
Donald, I hate you. If you are so much smarter than me, then why am I sitting in the White House right now?
Because you stole the election from me.
Fellas, enough fighting. We are getting off topic. I am content with putting this episode in A tier. It is mediocre, but not terrible. Let's move on. All right, gang, let's talk about culture shock. If either of you think this episode is not S tier, then you need to be either mentally disabled or have zero taste. This is an all-time great episode of SpongeBob. I cannot get through this episode without busting my gut, laughing my ass off. It is so goddamn funny and should be an S tier for how hilarious it is on its own.
Yes, Barack, I agree. This episode is fantastic. Says a lot about how there is no rhyme or reason to mob mentality and what the masses will enjoy. Also has a clever underlying motif of how success is based mostly on luck and natural talent rather than hard work.
For once, Sleepy Joe said something smart. This episode is the fucking bomb, and I love it almost as much as I love grabbing women by the, S tier for sure, Barack.
Okay, next is Home Sweet Pineapple, which I think is another easy S tier.
Barack, are you brain dead? This episode is mid as fuck.
Yeah, Barack, how could you even suggest this belongs in S tier? The episode isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but compared to others in Season 1, it isn't even close to the top.
Okay, you guys are probably right. I just think the scene where Patrick keeps crushing SpongeBob with his rock house because he is so scared of spiders is hysterical.
I do enjoy that part of the episode. Unfortunately, that does not save the entire episode from being mediocre at best. B tier.
Yeah, I am with Trump on this one. This episode is very average, the plot is stupid, and the episode feels directionless and meaningless.
Okay, I still think A tier is more appropriate, but I will put it in B tier since both of you pressured me into it. Next to bad is Employee of the Month. Overall, I think this is a really good episode, but not one of the best. Pretty funny and has a plot that actually makes sense and is purposeful. What are your guys' takes?
Very underrated episode, maybe the most underrated episode of SpongeBob ever. It shows a darker, more obsessive side of SpongeBob that unfortunately is lost in the later season. I think this is certainly A tier. Hell, I would be okay if we put it in S tier.
Yeah, this episode is pretty solid. I like the meme where SpongeBob is smashing the alarm clock, but Squidward has a closet full of them.
A tier it is. Let's move on. Let's talk about Reef Blower. This episode is like 30 seconds long and is boring and uneventful. D tier for me.
Yeah, I feel bad for putting it in D tier, but it's so short I completely forgot this episode even existed until just now.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. This episode is useless. D tier for sure. And we can go ahead and put it at the bottom of D tier as well.
McKay, next is jellyfishing. I think this may have been the first ever Squidward torture porn. That is not helping an already bad episode. C tier IMO.
Barack, you are crazy. This is a quality episode. It introduces one of SpongeBob and Patrick's favorite pastimes. And while this is a Squidward torture porn, the moments where SpongeBob and Patrick annoy Squidward are all funny and not forced at all. I think this is a lower tier, maybe high B tier if watching in a bad mood.
Sleepy Joe, you have officially lost what was left of your mind. This episode is hot garbage, just like your career as a politician. The only good that came out of this episode was when Patrick stuck the jellyfishing net through Squidward's bandaged tentacle. Otherwise, this episode is subpar. Joe, take off your nostalgia goggles while we get through the rest of the list, please.
I'll take off my goggles right after you take off that nasty spray tan.
Guys, stop fighting, please. We are almost done. Donald, I think you are being a little too harsh, but Joe, you are way too generous. We are putting this episode in C tier where it belongs. All right, next is Karate Choppers. I think this is a solid episode. Not the funniest, but from a purely entertainment perspective, it gets the job done. This belongs in the upper echelon of B tier. What about you guys?
This whole episode has a weird sexual undertone that I find strange for a children's cartoon. C tier for not being appropriate and not a very good episode in the first place.
Once again, you soft left-wing liberals fail to get anything right. This episode is fantastic. No child will understand the implicit sexual nature of Sandy and SpongeBob practicing karate on each other. This is a classic case of the writers being so clever that they made an episode that was hilarious and entertaining for both children and adults watching with their children. Kudos to them. I say S tier for the brilliant writing alone.
Donald, you bring up a good point. I still believe this episode lacks the jokes to be S tier, but I am okay with A tier.
That is fine with me.
Whatever you both know, I'm right.
Up next is the Halloween episode Scaredy Pants. I think this episode is pretty underrated. I do not recall watching it a lot with the kids, but on the rare occasion that I was able to catch it, I really enjoyed it. A tier in my book.
This episode scared my kids so much that I do not remember it very well. But on the few occasions I did watch it, the episode was pretty good. I like the animation and overall spooky art style.
Don't lie, Sleepy Joe. You are too much of a scaredy cat to watch this episode in its entirety, just like how you are too much of a coward to lead this country like a real man.
Piss off, Donald. I love this episode.
Well, at least you have one thing right. This episode is solid. It introduces one of my favorite characters, the Flying Dutchman, who is animated beautifully. I wish they kept that jagged art style for the remainder of the show. I love the ending where SpongeBob gets revenge on all of Bikini Bottom. A tier for sure.
I approve that decision.
A tier it is. Sleepy Time is our next episode. I think this is a solid episode, but not quite good enough for S tier, A tier, in my humble opinion. The premise of the episode is creative and fun. The episode has loads of hilarious jokes and exposes the best aspects of a lot of the characters that are featured. My favorite dream is Mr. Krabs.
I fucking love this episode so much. S tier for me. This episode is thought-provoking and hilarious.
Sleepy Joe, of course, you like the one episode that takes place in Dreamland.
Damn, I walked right into that one, didn't I?
L.
Regardless of Joe's stupidity, this episode is not that good. Sure, the imagery and scenes are pretty creative, but when you dig beneath the surface, this episode does not have much to offer. This feels like a waste of 11 minutes, C tier.
Trump, that is way too harsh. This is a great episode, and you know it. You just don't want to agree with Joe on anything. I am putting it in A tier, whether you like it or not.
First, your bitch wife ruins food, and now you're ruining my tier list. Obama, you and your family are the worst scum to ever disgrace the United States.
Say what you want, Trump, this episode is A tier, and that is final. Gentlemen, let's talk about the worthless piece of garbage known as Squeaky Boots. I hate this episode with a burning passion. D tier for being one of the most annoying episodes of SpongeBob ever created. I would put it lower if I could.
Barack, you are a bit too harsh. While the squeaking in this episode is very annoying, it is part of what makes the episode hilarious. This should at least be C tier.
Barack is right. While not the worst episode in season 1, this episode is brainless, mindless trash that no one should watch. D tier for sure.
Glad you and I see eye to eye on this, Donald. Next is Squidward, the Unfriendly Ghost. This is a pretty mediocre episode in my eyes. Typical Squidward torture porn stuff. C tier from me on this one.
I actually really like this episode. I think it should be A tier. This episode produced a number of unforgettable SpongeBob memes. While I usually hate Squidward torture porns, I do have to say that this might be the best one ever created. Not the best episode, but definitely good quality.
Donald, are you fucking insane? This episode objectively sucks. Not only does it not make any sense, but the conclusion is terrible. There is no value in this episode. It is not funny, and easily gets lost in the shuffle with plenty of far superior episodes from season 1. This episode deserves D tier.
D tier is a bit extreme, don't you think, Joe?
I can live with C tier, but we all know this episode is simply not very good.
Whatever, we can stick it in C tier. Fellow presidents, let's discuss SUD. I think this episode is really good. I laugh every time at the end when SpongeBob is used in the shower with Tom Kenny. Plus, the episode has a good moral for children to learn that they should trust doctors.
Of course, that is the takeaway you get from this episode after passing Obamacare, the bill that has turned Big Pharma into an even bigger problem than it was before you got into office, Barack. This episode makes me feel dazed and lethargic. It is extremely boring and drags on and on. Watching this episode makes me almost as tired as Sleepy Joe, so it belongs in C tier.
Donald, I hate it when you call me sleepy, but I have to agree with your assessment of this episode. It just isn't that good, pretty boring, not too funny, just feels lethargic and forced. C tier at best.
Okay, it can go in C tier, but I disagree with both of you. All right, up next is Tea at the Tree Dome. Overall, I think this is a really good episode. It introduces Sandy Cheeks as a character for the first time, has one of the most memorable / memeable scenes in SpongeBob's history, where SpongeBob almost dies from dehydration. I am leaning A tier.
Yeah, the episode is okay, but I hate the fact that it turns SpongeBob into a simp, one of the worst aspects of his character. It is disgusting, almost as disgusting as how hard Obama simps for Michelle, who is a 4 out of 10 at best.
Fuck you, Donald. At least my wife loves me for more than my money.
At least I have money.
At least I won my second election.
Fucking roasted. I think the episode is really good, despite SpongeBob undeniably being a simp. Like Barack said, there are so many memorable moments from this episode. I would argue for S tier, but I can live with it being an A tier so long as it is on the higher end. Good thing George isn't here. He always likes the episode with Sandy way more since she is from Texas, just like him.
Yeah, you know that motherfucker George has whacked off to some Sandy Cheeks Rule 34.
Let's not trash talk George while he is not here to defend himself. Speak of the devil. Let's talk about the episode Texas. I think this episode is mid at best. Not good, but not bad either. When my daughters watched this episode, they thought everyone from Texas was a bodybuilding scientist, just like Sandy.
I like this episode a lot, especially since it shows Sandy and SpongeBob being friends without SpongeBob being a simp. I appreciate that, but overall think the episode is average at best.
I actually really love this episode, but think the song that Sandy busts out in the middle of the episode is horrible and ruins the experience for me. C tier is where this belongs.
Yeah, I agree with C tier. Let's move on. All right, up next is The Chaperone. This episode is pretty weird to think about in hindsight because throughout the entirety of the series, SpongeBob seems to be portrayed as a grown man while Pearl is still a teenage girl.
Stop poking holes in the plot, Barack. There is way more evidence in the show that points to SpongeBob being a minor rather than a fully fledged adult. The only reason he owns his own house is for plot convenience. Do you really think the show would be as entertaining if he lived with his boring, moldy, cheese-looking ass parents? Anyway, regardless of Barack's stupid ratings, this episode is pretty mid, B tier for me.
Yeah, this episode is okay, but nothing special. It does have a few funny moments, and it is nice to see SpongeBob have a somewhat romantic moment with someone that isn't Sandy. B tier, in my opinion, as well.
I was going to suggest B tier as well until Donald so rudely interrupted me.
I know the feeling. Did you see our first 2020 presidential debate?
Yeah, it was hard to watch you both look like jackasses.
I totally won that debate, though.
Yeah, too bad you didn't win the election, tough guy.
Fuck you, Sleepy Joe. I will be back in 2024, and you know it.
Guys, stop fighting, please. We literally only have 3 more episodes to discuss. Next up is The Paper. Am I the only one who barely remembers this episode?
Yeah, I barely remember this episode.
You can't remember anything, Sleepy Joe. This episode is a bizarre one, and frankly, not very good either. D tier, in my opinion. I think the reason neither of you remember this episode is because it was so bland and forgettable.
D tier it is. Let's move on. Our second to last episode is Valentine's Day. I barely remember this episode too, but my memory isn't nearly as faded as the last episode. This episode was pretty good. Patrick's last line is hilarious. I think we should place it in B tier.
Obama, that is too generous. I think this belongs in C tier, maybe even high D tier. The episode is annoying, childish, brainless, something Sleepy Joe probably enjoys.
Screw you, Donald. You know, I actually hate this episode. It belongs in D tier. Trash episode, trash plot line, trash animation, trash music, just all around low quality dribble. If you told me this was from season 6 through 13, I would believe you.
Joe, just because something is from one of the later seasons does not mean it is bad.
True, but there is a noticeable dip in episode quality after season 5.
I would argue the dip in quality starts after season 3.
Who gives a shit? We are only talking about season 1. I am putting this in D tier. All right, guys, the last episode we have to talk about is Walking Small. What do you think?
Pretty solid episode, but nothing noteworthy. I like the overall theme of the episode, but the jokes are nowhere to be found. B tier for me, and that's only because I am in a generous mood.
I like this episode a lot. I really like how Spongebob shows some personality and stands up for himself after being manipulated by Plankton. The premise of the episode is clever, and the writing is unmatched. A-tier ranking from President Biden.
Sorry, Joe, but I am going to veto that decision and agree with Donald. This is a good episode, but not good enough to be A tier. As Donald pointed out, it just isn't funny enough. Though I do agree with you that the creativity of the episode cannot be denied. All right, guys, that wraps it up. Thanks for hanging with me. We should do season 2 sometime.
Yeah, that sounds lit, Barack, but I need to go to bed. It is way past my bedtime. The leader of the free world needs his sleep.
What a loser that Sleepy Joe is. Barack, do you want to play some World of Warcraft?
Why the fuck would I want to play an overrated game from 2004?
Those guys are schmucks anyway. For anyone still watching this, make sure to smash that motherfucking like button as hard as you can. Also, make sure to leave a comment if you disagree with any of our rankings. You can also use the links in the description to support this channel and yourself. Whether it's signing up with Chime to earn $100 with a new checking account bonus, or signing up with Swag Bucks to earn money from taking surveys and finding online shopping discounts, you will be greatly supporting this channel. I love you all. Thank you for watching and have a great night.